Welcome, Pathfinders, to the Find the Path podcast Recall Knowledge for the Game Mastery Guide, version
Woo!
2.0.
I was going to say, we have to be specific on 2.0 because it has the same title as the earlier version.
It's true, Paizo has a habit of doing that now. I am, of course, one of your hosts, Rick Sandage. I am joined by the esteemed Jordan Jenkins and the
Heyo.
indomitable Ross Scoggin.
Hi, I can't be dominated.
So don't even try.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we're here today to talk about a book that came out, I think, over a year ago now.
It's
Yes,
been a bit,
over
yeah.
a year ago now. So, looking back at the Game
Yeah.
Mastery Guide, do I need to point left or right, Jordan? Because I always get it wrong.
Who are you pointing to?
Game Mastery Guide. Do we have it posted up someplace?
Oh,
I
other
assume we did.
direction.
Oh,
Because it's right here.
it's over there.
This
Okay.
way.
I'm not looking. Yeah, so I guess we'll go ahead and get this started. We, of course, have already asked our fine folk over at our Discord for some questions, which we'll be answering towards the end of this. If you have any questions of your own for us to answer about our thoughts or our views, or if you want spoilers for a book that's over a year old, we'd be more than happy to provide those to you. And feel free to make some comments over in the comments. I guess that's also that way.
Yeah.
I'm going to say.
Well, I don't know. Comments are, depending on your app, it's down, it's left, it's right. Who knows?
You'll find them. We trust you.
But we do like to hear from your feedback. If you have anything
Sure.
you'd like us to address or, questions, whatever, absolutely feel free to pop that in there.
Absolutely. And again, we and share your own thoughts. We are paid professionals, but we are not this is just our thoughts on this. It's not really a review per se, because as partners with Paizo, we're not necessarily unbiased, and so we can't be considered an unbiased news source, but instead these are just kind of our general thoughts, and your thoughts are just as important as ours.
Very true.
Segueing from there, let's go ahead and look at the Game Mastery Guide. And I guess let's start with this beautiful cover.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, a Wayne Reynolds special.
Oh,
Yeah, it definitely looks his style, although I'm surprised he managed to restrain himself with no extra belts and beads and strings and 15 wands or whatever.
It's very slightly less angular than his normal style, too, I think.
Yeah, the Dragons definitely has his angular style to it, but
Absolutely, but like Elasnist, not quite as much.
Yes. So as Ross mentioned there, that is Elasnus, the Rune Lord of Wrath, along with a black dragon that I don't know if it has a name, as I have never fought Elasnus, but if it does, let us know.
Yep.
But this is cool because it also calls back to the first edition version, which had Karzog, as well as his blue dragon friend, whose name I also forget.
Yeah.
George the Blue Dragon.
George the Blue George of the Dragons. So I'm hoping that by 7th edition we should have one of these for each one of the Rune Lords. So Paizo, we need to get to 7th edition ASAP.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice that they did this nice homage to it, where it's it's the same design to it. It's kind of the same theme. I was just trying to check here real quick. Let me see if I can
I
find
appreciate the
nice
change in
this.
pose, though. Like, they didn't do like the same pose, because the first one, I believe, has Karzog sitting on a throne.
It does, and it has Karzog sitting on a throne with a dragon behind him, so it's completely different. I also appreciate that you'll notice that the back of the throne has that bar going across and the two spikes coming up and then the curve down. That's actually the Rune of Wrath.
That is very true.
I actually
carved
missed
into the
that.
back of her throne, so that's really neat. There's a lot going on with this one, including
Very
Screaming
cool.
Guy down in the corner inside of his little cage.
Oh, he's dead. I'm almost positive that man's dead.
Yeah, either that or
He
he's
looks
one
a
of
little
those
mummified.
he's one of those creepy guys from down in the well in Ocarina of Time.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
We dead? Uh-oh.
Who knows? So shall we actually crack open this book, get into it? We've all got our copies here in front of us, and by that I mean I think Jordan's got a PDF.
I got
I've got
a PDF.
mine. It's the shiny one.
I have one as well. So mine is the non-shiny one, but
so we
Still
have
good. This is
all,
the one that we can
all
actually
prints that you can have of it basically represented.
It's true. Ross can actually look at that cover in person. I have to pull up a PDF of that cover.
It's beautiful.
Yep.
Look how beautiful this is. That is followed by a page that says Pathfinder and Gamemastery Guide, and that is followed by a table of contents. So let's go ahead and skip past
Wow,
that.
I didn't realize this was a page-by-page review. I didn't take
Page
nearly enough
by
notes.
page.
Yeah, we're going to be at this for 10 hours. So
I hope you had nothing else going on.
Hope you like our dramatic reading of this book.
Yes. Introduction. So I suppose let's go ahead and start with the introduction here. It's an introduction. It does the usual introduction stuff.
It introduces.
It discusses what a GM does and so on.
And kind of the reiteration of the the classic rule of it's your game. So,
yes, the golden rule is in there.
Yep.
Yeah. So, or the first rule, or what have you. I think they
whatever you like
it
to
the
call
first
it.
Rule.
Yeah.
So, which is basically have fun. I like that there's a little bit of a hint in there for this version of it, where it's kind of like you're the game master, so the golden rule is kind of it's whatever you say it is. So as long as it's also fun.
Yes. Because the goal is for everyone to have fun, but that does include the game master.
That does, yes. Sometimes that is overlooked, but it is important that if you are game mastering, first off, thank you for taking up that mantle, and secondly, you should be having fun with this. However you have fun. So yeah, my thoughts on the introduction are it does a good job of pointing out where a new GM should start. It also allows for the fact that experienced game masters have different needs. So I like how in the choosing your tool section, it talks like if you're a newer game master, you'll want this stuff. If you're a game master running published Pathfinder adventures, you'll want to go to this part of the book. If you're looking to create your own Pathfinder adventures, you want to go here. If you're an experienced game master, you'll find customization options here. It's a very well done roadmap, and I usually just skim over introductions, particularly for game master guides, because I don't assume that I know everything that's going to be in there, but usually they sound a lot the same. You're going to hear me say this a lot during this review. I was surprised by how much this didn't read like just another game master guide. It didn't read like the Dungeon Master Guide or the Dungeon Master Guide 2 or the Game Mastery Guide for First Edition. It felt very well thought out, and we'll explore that in a little bit more depth. But do you guys have any thoughts on the introduction here?
Not except for what you've just covered, to be honest.
I was gonna say that was a pretty thorough covering of a couple of pages.
I am nothing if not thorough.
It's true.
So how about Ross, you roll us into chapter 1 here.
Chapter 1, or as I like to call it, the Game Mastery Basics, which is good.
Like to call it that.
I was about to say, which is good because that's what they call it. So I think we're all on the same page there. So first of all, the Game Mastery Basics, I mean, really, it just gives you what it says. It's the nuts and bolts of running the game, of how to handle things like rules disputes, or just, how to interpret things. It talks about even just like the actual pure mechanics, like going in depth for like, okay, you're fighting underwater. What does that mean? You're like gonna go map out this place. What does that mean? Like what exactly are these differences here? I mean, obviously there's plenty of great advice, especially if you're just getting your feet wet, or even if you just are like, what is Pathfinder? I'm gonna pick this up and see if I can learn how to run a game.
I'll read this book before I buy the 700-page one.
Yeah.
Just to see if I want to do this.
This one seems a little less intimidating. I mean,
but I do appreciate that it doesn't really rehash anything that's in the core rulebook super greatly. Like, it's mostly filled with advice and guidelines to help you in being a better GM, less so than if you didn't buy the core rulebook, this is the book to run adventures with. So they do complement each other really well.
Yeah, I certainly agree. It's divided into a couple of sections. I figure we'll touch on some of these sections, and I figure we'll skip over any of the ones that wouldn't interest people quite as much. I think we already just hit on like the general advice section, which is kind of where it starts off. Although
Yeah.
I do like that it even talks about things that normally aren't really addressed in a game. Because usually when you're looking at game mastery stuff, it's a lot of rules.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of this is how you run the game, this is how you play the game. And there's a lot of things here talking about pacing. It talks about failing forward, which is something that I don't think I've ever seen mentioned in a game. It's something you hear about in jargon, and if you're involved in game mastering, where they talk about, you know, a failure on the player's part should still progress the story and things like that. It even talks about like giving false information, secret checks, metagaming, a lot of things that and has a whole section here talking about like NPCs. Particularly one that I enjoyed was portraying NPCs, and then I think it's the second section there, betrayal, and
Curse your
talking
sudden
about
but
how
inevitable
like
betrayal.
yeah, if an NPC betraying the party in some way, or if you have an NPC betraying the party, lay the groundwork so that the players don't feel ambushed by the twist. I'm somewhat notorious for loving NPCs that eventually betray the party. You can only ever get away with it once or twice, because
and then they
after
become
that
paranoid.
you either get to the point where, well, yeah, you get to the point where the players trust no one. But if you do seed the hints in there that makes the party go, I'm suspicious of this person, and then when they betray him, it is one of those curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal that they knew it was coming, but they kind of hoped not. Yeah, and Ross already mentioned about the kind of running the encounters, which talks a little bit about aerial combat and aquatic combat, which is only vaguely touched on before. What did you guys think about their advice in here? They go, I like it because they expand on rules from the main book. So this feels like it's supplementing, almost like this is Paizo answering people's feedback from the core rulebook, because it expands things on like initiative and stealth. I just didn't know what you guys thought about like them adding in extra rules for, or extra clarification, I suppose would be the proper way to phrase it.
Like these don't these feel like, again, these are more like extensions of the rules rather than like we've just made up new rules in this separate book that you have to buy separately. You know, it's like it also helps codify some of the stuff that you might be doing as a GM anyway. Like one of the sections talks about like ad hoc bonuses, and like how to handle those, which personally as a GM is something I really like to do. Like I like just throwing that stuff in there because, you know, if somebody does something really interesting in a role-playing sense, I love to give them a little bonus for that, just because it's like, it encourages people to, you know, try weird things or new things. But of course, it also does say the flip side to that is if you do it too much in certain situations, then your players might decide, oh, wow, every time like I describe myself kick flipping off something, I get a +1 bonus to attack.
I'm going to kick flip everything.
Yeah, you know, like I'm just going to kick flip off of like every surface that I can find. It's like,
they will call me Sir George the Kick Flipper.
And then all of a sudden, you know, your game is turned into like a Tony Hawk game. But
what if I grind off of this enemy? How many bonuses will I get for that one? At least a hero point, I hope.
Which, I mean, if you're fine with that, great. But like, you know, that's not necessarily the way that I would necessarily want to play.
I'm very interested in someone's playthrough of Age of Ashes with the all pro skater adventuring party.
Dude.
Oh goodness. Yeah, no, I think in general the kind of, it does kind of feel a little bit, I wouldn't call it an FAQ because it's really not. It's really giving you that guidance that, like, honestly we get a lot too. Like a lot of the emails that we get in from people is like, hey, I'm having trouble running this encounter. I'm trying to do this and that. And this kind of just helps give you some of those guidelines to kind of kickstart you up. So if you are a newer GM, you're going to go, oh, okay, I can skip a couple of mistakes and just, you know, cut this in and get to it. And I think part of what they're saying, a lot of it is the kind of things that aren't codifiable, right? Like they're not rules. They are the kind of things that you kind of just learn from experience. And being able to, you know, like to use the example of giving those bonuses, it is one of those things that it specifically says, you know, we don't recommend that you give it all the time, but for something extraordinary. So it can't be something that could happen often, or else you're doing it too often. And I think like that kind of like um, helps you with the kind of soft skills part of the game, because a lot of people I know are really good at the crunchy rules part, and then soft skills and interacting with your players can be the kind of part where everybody kind of goes, I don't know what I'm doing now.
Yeah. I think you definitely hit the nail on the head with one element of this book that I saw come up a lot, which is there are assumptions, I think, that as a seasoned game master, as I think all three of us are, that we have learned things but we were never taught them. So for instance, this talks about doing batch initiatives, where it's if you have 4 goblins, have them all act on the same initiative. And that's something that for a lot of game masters that's ingrained with you over time. But you don't really think that it's like that's something that you picked up from somewhere. It's, Ross and I both both played with someone before we were game masters. Jordan played with me before he ever ran his own games. And so you just kind of develop these things where it's generations upon generations of game masters handing it down. Whereas if you're somebody starting from scratch, you don't necessarily know that, okay, I've got 12 goblins. I'm going to have to give each of them their own initiative. It logically makes sense. Or just things like placing characters on the map, and they suggest coming or having the party establish a marching order before combat begins. And that's something that you have ingrained in your head from years of playing the game, but I like that they actually bring it up here for someone that doesn't have a person handing them or teaching them the ropes before they go off and become a game master on their own. So after this section, which has some
group's getting into a game, it could be oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go on.
Kind of. Oh, yeah. If a group's just getting into the game, and it is, like we've just decided, and this is the person who was most interested in being a game master, but none of us have ever played before. Like, this is some great stuff in here.
Oh yeah. No, I
mean, then,
I was just gonna say, I wish I had this book when I was starting. Like, this is some great advice. So, and then after the little opening segment here, it goes into a couple of different things, like Ross was saying, that it covers things like, different types of aquatic combat, aerial combat, social encounters, which are kind of a fun break there. It then gets into a little bit on running exploration, which the only thing I really wanted to shout out to in this section is, I think it's page 18 of the book. There's a sidebar here called Quick Environmental Details, and I love this.
There's a lot of helpful charts like that, where it's just quick, easy, like references that you can just pull from.
Yeah. So it's Jordan, give me one of those options: aquatic, Arctic, something like that.
Go for do they have forest in there?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. And Ross, give me one of the senses.
Let's do smell.
So you can go in here, and if you have your party walking through a forest and you're doing your usual description of dappling light through the trees and everything, you can also throw in here, and it shows under smells, smelling the decomposing vegetation, the flowering plants, the pine trees, the earthy mushrooms as you navigate your way through the woods. And it gives you these for all of these different senses, so that a lot of times game masters people will write in and ask me about things like, how do you engage, or how do you set the scene, and how do you establish that? And the most common thing people forget is we're very visual people, and we humans as a species, and we listen, but you want to engage all of the senses at once, so that it's like, not only can you see the cat, but you can also almost feel the soft fur of the cat as it strokes across your chin.
As it makes an
hello,
epic,
Amelia.
I was gonna say, as it makes the epic descent down Ross's shoulder.
Yes.
So I just wanted to shout out, because I loved that sidebar, and I feel like that is something that a lot of new game masters especially, but even seasoned game masters, can look at that and go, okay, I'm doing something and it takes place in a mountain, and maybe I should be describing the powdery snow crunching under my players' boots to really immerse them in that sensation. So
yeah, or one of the things I try to incorporate the most is like weather. Like, it's not every day is exactly the same, even if it is in a season like summer or something, where at least in Texas, it just tends to be really hot for a long
Yeah.
period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, you have like one day there's a warm breeze, another
Yeah.
day it's completely still, another day there's like, some distant clouds.
Yep. It's 200 days of summer punctuated by tornadoes.
Oh,
Welcome to Texas.
It's so true, though.
Yep.
Yes. No, absolutely. And it's I felt like that was like a great section that really delved into, like the exploration and involving all the senses. And then they get into a couple other things, like more the mechanic side of it, like getting lost and hazards and all the rest of that.
Yeah.
Heck, they even have a section on follow the expert. So again, it's that weaving in the mechanics into what is also just kind of a teaching experience for a new game master. So other than that, yeah, they talk about downtime, which is a useful segment.
Yeah.
Especially considering in the core rulebook, I think downtime gets like 3 pages.
Yeah,
and most of that's retraining.
Yeah.
Actually, it only gets 1 page if I remember.
Okay.
It gets almost no coverage. So
I was giving it too much credit.
Yeah, this expands it out to a lot more detail. If you're, especially if you're looking to add that into your campaign from a homebrew perspective, this gives you a lot more information about like what you could or should be doing. They have even suggestions for what you can do, which I thought was really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is like, you can easily treat downtime as just like, hey, this is the part where people craft stuff and make money, and that's pretty much it, which is fine. But I think, sometimes some of the most memorable stuff happens in downtime, honestly. It's like, my character adopted a dog in the downtime, and so now there's a dog at his house or something.
Yep.
I mean, like, I don't know, there's all sorts of different stuff you could do, and it's just like, you build on those experiences, I think. But it's just from like a random downtime roll. Like, I was building a house and a dog came by and I adopted it.
Yeah. And it does give you kind of a section for rolling up things like events and all the rest of that. So I think that that's really interesting, the way that this book does a lot of things where they just take rules out of the core rule book and they expand upon what the rule offers you or what you can do with it. But yeah, that's most of the downtime stuff. The only thing I want to draw attention to is I think it's page 27, which has the comedic phrase in my mind of extreme retraining, which sounds like it's some sort of extreme sport or something like that, but it's actually just retraining a whole bunch of stuff about your character.
The things you can't normally retrain with the normal rules.
Changing an ancestry or heritage,
changing your background out, things like that.
Yeah. So following that, talks a little bit about adjudicating rules, which is useful information. It's not something that after years of experience, it tends to be something I do rather easily, and fortunately I have a group of players where adjudicating rules is rather straightforward and simple. I do like that they mentioned the yes but.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it's definitely a great tool for storytelling. I think also another great bit of advice there is reviewing. Like, after you've had a rules discussion, maybe give it a day or two, go back to it and just like look it up again, maybe with a clearer head. You're not in the moment, you've got time to just sit there and like think it out, because sometimes it's like maybe you made the wrong call whenever you were in the moment, but that's okay. I mean, it's a learning experience. We all learn from stuff, and I mean, even now, every once in a while, I still get something wrong. I mean, I'm not perfect by any means.
I appreciate the guidance that they gave that specifically said, if you're gonna do an on-the-spot judgment, make sure all the players are cool with it. Because what that is actually kind of leads you into home rules. So I thought that was a kind of nice way to make it in a slightly more democratic standpoint, because when you do those snap judgments, sometimes it's going to feel like it's a little bit in the favor of one person over the other, especially if you don't have the consistency. So I think they really put in the consistency as being key to, happy adjudication. That you learn that with experience, and them calling it out, I think, was really helpful.
Yeah. And that kind of rolls into the next section, which is the resolving problems, which can include things like, I like that they start with the total party kills. I do want to draw attention to the artwork in this section, which is Mauricio running away with like everyone's gear.
It is
like
delightful.
the paladin shield and the barbarian sword.
It's not the fact that she's stealing all the stuff. I've never seen her art with a grin that big. Like, she is so happy as she's sprinting off with everybody's stuff.
It's like,
super
man,
great.
I can pawn this for a lot.
Yeah. So but it then goes on to talk about like problematic players, power imbalances, things like that, all of which can stem from, if you make a house rule, sometimes you have to be able to readjust to it, because it may sound balanced in the moment. But like we're talking about, Sir George the Kick Flipper, if you continue to give someone the same bonuses for a house rule or something like that, eventually they may get an unfair advantage. It also does talk a little, it's got a sidebar in here about cheating and how to deal with that if you have that at the table, as well as things like telling someone that they can't play with you anymore.
Which is a difficult conversation.
And it
is
also,
the crappiest job of a game master.
Yeah, I mean, and it always falls to the game master to deal with that. I love the safety tools thing. I actually missed that in the core rulebook, so I had to go look it up. That's super important, and it's something that I didn't even realize, because that's not really necessarily something our group has to deal with. But I love the call out and the giving you the tools to actually help with consent and with making sure everybody's comfortable at your table.
Yeah, the X card is a definite good thing to explore, and a lot of times you can go, if you're especially running an adventure path, it's sometimes a good idea to go on the message boards as a game master and check beforehand to see what it's going to involve. And if someone has an issue with something like, maybe cannibalism is something that really gets to someone, then maybe avoid ogres. So
God, yes.
Extreme fear of spiders, maybe swap that out.
The next section is something I found really interesting, because it's something that I have never personally done, but I hear people bring up to us often when they write in letters, which is the narrative collaboration. The idea of having, in essence, almost multiple game masters. And it's something we've never explored, but I often hear someone say that, okay, well, we do an adventure path, but then there's 6 people playing and each person GMs one of the books. And it intrigues me, and I kind of like the idea that they talk about here with like the creative collaboration and what challenges come with it, decentralized storytelling. So yeah, it's kind of an intriguing thing.
Yeah, it's especially interesting. I think the thing with doing adventure paths is the story is kind of already set for you, but if you're homebrewing and you're not, you're not doing the Epic of Gilgamesh kind of a thing, you're doing something that's kind of written as you go, that it's very interesting, because I have listened to a lot of podcasts that do this, and the shared storytelling is very interesting because it gives you the ability to have, like, the one thing that I think sometimes can be a challenge as a game master is getting everybody interested in what's going on. And being able to collaboratively storytell allows the players to give you more input onto what they like. So if you notice that they keep doing the same story beats, the same hooks, I think that that's something that you can just roll with as a game master and incorporate more into your story. And so it's a really interesting methodology. You have to be very cool with it kind of going wherever it goes, and maybe it goes a little off the rails, but that's okay. So it's, not for everybody and not for every adventure, I don't think, but
yeah, I think there's some groups of creatives that would get a lot of mileage out of doing something like this.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I just found that intriguing. That's something I've never really thought about delving into. And a lot of it also, I do like the idea of the story points, where players can spend points to interject things. So just be like, I'm going to spend a story point to say that while we're having this conversation, my character's ex-wife walks in to the tavern. And now I'm going to have an awkward moment.
There's a tool out there that's called Whimsy cards, and I don't remember who made them. So, I apologize to the makers for not including you in this, but the idea behind it was that you could distribute these how you want. I played in a game once where, like, at the beginning of each session, the game master would hand out 2 Whimsy cards per player, and they just have something written on them, like unexpected betrayal, like suddenly one character betrays another, even though like there's or like like family friend or something, like this guy over there is actually a friend of your family from way back or something like that. And so that you could basically play them to adjust the story. Like, it wouldn't necessarily let you, like, if you were going to fight somebody, you were going to fight somebody. It's just now they happen to be like your family friend that has apparently betrayed you. But it would allow you to kind of like adjust the story in certain ways, which I found very interesting. So I'd be interested to see how that works, like with the story points.
So I think that'd be kind of intriguing. And anyone listening, feel free to comment if you've ever done anything like that to kind of delve into that. But after that, they talk a little bit about special circumstances, which in large part is just like, what if you have a table and it's just you and one other person? Or what if you have a table and it's you and 8 players? Or what if you're doing Pathfinder Society?
I've done that, by the way. Me and 8 players.
That is something else.
It's a lot.
I do particularly enjoy, however, that they do touch on things like player needs, though. They do have a section where they talk about sensory differences, where if you have a player who's hard of hearing, or has difficulty processing large amounts of sensory information at once, how to approach that and how to make a table that is comfortable and conducive to everyone that is playing. And I just really enjoyed them making a point to bring up the blind or the deaf or the hard of hearing, and how to make a table that is open to everyone. So I just enjoy. I know it only got a small mention here, and I would love to see it expanded on some more elsewhere. But I think that is a definite benefit to raising awareness that not everyone is going to, if you describe a scene a certain way, or if you set up your gaming space a certain way, that people who have difficulty with, I think they even bring up in here, that you can consult them beforehand, or even create handouts that they can consult during the session. It even brings up people with attention span.
I know all about that. That's me. The one thing that was kind of interesting about the attention span specifically is it mentions giving players something else to do. That's a kind of a tough one for me, because like if somebody's playing on their phone, especially somebody with ADD, I know like for me, the things that really lock my attention in is video games. And so if I'm sitting there playing like a mobile game or something, I'm gone. Like I'm in a totally different world. So that's kind of one of those use your best judgment, I feel like. Because like for kids, definitely need something else to do, because like a 4-hour combat is very difficult to sit through,
Yeah. To share a personal experience, actually, I had a player of mine that did have attention span issues, that they could not focus on a single thing for too long, and actually focused better if they were working on multiple things at once. And so every time that we would sit down, he would sit down to play, he would also bring over miniatures and would paint miniatures while engaging the game. So, he would be still involved in the overarching game of playing. It was D&D at that time, but involved in the overarching game, and would create these phenomenal miniatures for use later on, where he's just like, you need a knoll? I've got a knoll. And he always carried like this fishing box full of miniatures. It was great.
That's awesome.
It is good to be able to be accommodating to people that have needs beyond the rest of your group. So following that, we get into rarity in game, which again is one of those touching on the mechanics, and it just kind of touches on how sometimes things are rare someplace, and actually kind of expands on what the phrasing of things like uncommon means.
So it's uncommon, but like okay, so
Yeah. So it's kind of like, this is the thing that you'd have to go to 3 different Home Depots to find, as opposed to, yeah, it's not your standard Allen wrench set.
Can't get that on Amazon.
But again, they just kind of hit it in one page here. But I don't know if you guys agree with that. Kind of what they're talking about with like, what are the contexts for uncommon and how you can use that for world building.
No, I mean, I think it's good advice. Moreover, too, like it helps explain to players, like, well, I want this option, but it says it's rare. But I mean, come on, how rare could that really be? It's like, no, like this is something
by
that,
definition, this is what that means.
Yeah,
I also appreciate the element when they talk about unique items of talking about what the word unique actually means and the context of you can, like, if your name is Bob the Ogre, you are unique in that you are Bob the Ogre and there is no one like you, but that doesn't mean that your gear is unique necessarily. And like it really is one of a kind items that are unique.
Yeah. So I think it's very useful to, and they do that a lot in this book also, it's very useful that they go in and they clarify. They take things that were established in the core rule book and then they clarify and codify exactly what they mean. So I also, again, like that they touch on the world building thing where it's, a katana may be uncommon in a European-esque setting. However, if you're playing something in Tian Sha, much less uncommon.
Yeah.
And when we get into the last couple of sections, I feel like can all be rolled into one. They delineate them because it helps for someone trying to search through here, which is they talk about campaign structure, adventure design, and encounter design. Just kind of rolling all of this into one. It does a good job. Again, falling back to that, I think I use this word a lot in my notes here. Codifying the structure that goes into building an adventure. Sound a little too professional there, but yeah, it gives a very clear indication on how many encounters is manageable and advice on how to run them.
Especially
plus there's a treasure chart.
Yeah, and it breaks it down what you're trying to run. Are you trying to do a one shot? Are you trying to do a brief campaign, an extended campaign, and then it actually gives you some guidance on like number of locations, what the levels could be starting and ending at. I think that is, especially if you're starting homebrewing, it's always overwhelming because there's so much to do. To get like just a little bit of help on kind of just outlining what you need to do, I thought was really helpful.
Like it teaches you how to make the blueprints, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, if you don't have years of experience, that's something that you just don't immediately start knowing.
Exactly. Like I will say that, when I was like 13, yeah, I made some, dungeons and adventures and stuff, but I mean, no one would want to play them now. Trust me on
that. Patreon goal.
To
release Ross's 13-year-old adventures.
Oh no! Oh, I'm so embarrassed.
Oh man!
No.
The famed dungeon of Doug the Dugar. Anyway.
Wow, that's actually more detail than I usually gave them.
Sure. But yeah, and again on the subject of them doing like these kind of this isn't even a sidebar here, but they do talk about style in here where they talk about the number of sessions that something like a dungeon crawl should take, or high adventure, or a horror game, or so on, and then like a couple of suggestions on combat encounters, role-playing encounters, traps, etc. So I found that very, very interesting and and pretty useful.
Yeah, and I think that it has a lot of the main story beats kind of put into here because like it has villains and reoccurring villains. What happens, what should rewards look like, and kind of breaks down like treasure and what that is kind of like, and what selling items really means, and different ways you can do selling items. And I thought that again, it's one of those things that for a first time GM who decided to homebrew, I think this is like a really great like chapter specifically to go through and say, here's my outline, here's what I'm trying to do, here's how you start a campaign, end a campaign, What happens if, let's say, the PCs fail at something? The whole the failing forward kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of is reoccurring here.
No.
Oh yeah. It's like, on the subject of failing forward and everything, it's that and it kind of, I think they might touch on this a little bit in the combat encounter section, where a common mistake is this idea that the characters losing automatically means death. And not like they might be captured, and then you can get to that wonderful jailbreak section that I always love from every video game that I play, and then inevitably they give you all of your gear back immediately, and it disappoints me.
That's like, why even bother with this then?
Well, yeah. But I will say that there's a sidebar on page 48 called Quick Adventurer Groups that I think is extremely useful, where it just gives a couple of breakdowns for here's some basic structures for encounters. So it's like, here's how to balance something like, a boss and his lackeys is 1 creature of the party's level +2, and then 4 creatures of the party level -4.
Yeah.
And I like how that can be immediately used where it's, okay, what is it, Mook Squad? I love that one.
Yeah, the Mook Squad was funny.
6 creatures of party level -4. And it's a quick way to just go, I want to throw an encounter at them, and I think they talk about that in here, you don't want every encounter to be, you're going to die.
Yeah.
Like, every encounter doesn't need to be super hard. Sometimes it's nice to be able to go, okay, we just walk into a counter, and then through the mechanics of the game, we can illustrate how far our characters have progressed.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things they also say, like, because some fights are just like it, if the PC steamroll, let them bask in it. Like, don't try to do the thing where it's like, oh, I really wanted something else to do, so I'm going to, have the door break down and there's 10 more guys behind it or something, The other thing that was really interesting about this section with the quick adventuring groups is also dynamic encounters. So it mostly means like terrain that's changing, say the burning, the building is burning down, and, there's different things that are happening every round that kind of change the battlefield. And I thought that was really interesting because I'd never really thought of constructing something like that. So it was just really kind of a good inspiration for, doing the kind of, epic battle while, there's lightning storms and all kinds of crazy stuff. Just seemed really cool.
I will say Paizo definitely specializes in those set pieces in a number of adventure paths.
Yeah.
I won't want to spoil any of them because they're all amazing, but my God.
Yeah. Not to give a spoiler here, but I'll say that set piece encounters is one of the things that I know this adventure path gets a lot of flack, generally speaking, but it is one of the most memorable things about Second Darkness. Second Darkness has some great set piece encounters.
I wish I knew what that was.
God, yes.
I'll never get to play Second Darkness.
Yeah, maybe someday. Future Patreon goal. Anyway,
when we're in the old folks' home and we have nothing to do but play Pathfinder all day.
Yep, we're working
Rick.
on it.
We've already added 2 more Patreon goals today, so
we're on a roll.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That $10,000 a month or something. I'll one-on-one Jordan through something. I don't know.
We'll need the mythic rules for that,
I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll just mythic rules Jordan through Second Darkness.
Woo!
One-man army.
Oh man.
Yep. The last section here talks about drawing maps, which it's a very short section, although I do like that. I had not realized, especially because I've been playing the game so long, that I had eventually just adopted what is considered, I guess, the standard drawing a map style for things, where it's like, a wall with an S drawn through it is a secret door, a little squiggly line on this is a curtain, like a solid line theme, but then you like make little ripple designs for it for like a pond. And so I do like that it has a section here which just covers, these are the symbols that you can use so that anyone looking at this map, everyone is looking at the exact same symbols.
Well, and it also goes through kind of basic map making of start with a legend too. So like if you do adopt a different, symbology, put it on a legend so that everybody could at least reference it and know what's going on, even if you're not using like the kind of official way that we've kind of learned with, Paizo maps.
Like, the frog symbol is a pond. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then after that, we get into the next chapter, which, by the way, I just want to throw out here that the artwork on page 54 is some of my favorite. The giant steampunk dwarven forge.
Oh,
man. Yeah, it's good stuff.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, we
Pretty
kind of
awesome.
skipped over it, but like the art in this is fantastic.
Yeah.
I especially appreciate that they actually kind of tell a story. If you follow the characters, there's a
Yeah.
little bit of a story that's kind of done through it all that I think is just really, it's kind of subtle, but it's really interesting.
Yeah.
So Jordan, you want to hit on what we're looking at in chapter 2?
All right, so chapter 2 is all about tools. So these are basically the tools to help you, mostly for homebrew stuff. So building creatures, hazards, items, things that you can do to make your items more interesting and unique. It goes through intelligent items, cursed items, artifacts, afflictions. Always the fun thing with like poisonous diseases, things like that. And then like really just gives you that kind of, I think, baseline of if you wanted to set an adventure in Golarion. So it has some things about what does it mean when it's a planar world? What does a nation really mean, and how would you stat one out?
Yeah. So I'm curious to get you guys your opinion on this. Am I the only one that felt like this was the stuff that they had to cut from the core rulebook because it was already 700 pages?
150%, yes. I literally was reading this and I was like, man, if this had been in the core, like literally, this is a huge section.
Yeah.
This is a massive section. So like, this
is
is definitely
the biggest
stuff,
section of the book.
Yeah, this is definitely the stuff that they were like, it won't fit in the core rule book. We'll put it in another book. But it's the kind of stuff that, like, honestly is the most interesting to me because you can turn the entire game of Pathfinder's like APs and modules and things and use this lens that they've kind of presented to look at how they do their own encounter design and how they're doing their own setups and things. And it's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
To kind of get that view of how they build their stuff to kind of crib off of.
Yeah. I think some of this we can kind of skim over a little bit because the building the creature rules they'd already put out as a separate PDF before this book even came out on how to build monsters, although it is interesting, and I find it intriguing about how close they kind of are to the Starfinder creature creation rules.
It also this section, the whole chapter here really just shows you how tight the math is too. Because what's really interesting about this is how much of this they don't have to give you new charts, new tables that you have to go through. What they do instead is they do a lot of, hey, reference this DC adjustment chart that's in the core rulebook, and everything kind of runs off of that. So it's actually really tight. Like the difference between a level 2 and a level 3 thing is like one number. It's very, very tight. And I thought that was really interesting because I remember we were at PaizoCon and we were in a design session where they were talking about second edition, and Mark Seifter was talking about the math being tight. And I didn't really like conceptualize what he meant, but that's what he meant. Like there is very little difference in a mathematical sense between a lot of different things by level.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I will say that these rules did help me a lot when I was looking at Dark Moon Veil, if you followed that series at all. And I mean, basically,
we were there.
I hope so.
If not, check out our YouTube, and you too can watch it.
Yeah, true. Or I think it's on our Ventures.
Actually,
channel
no,
now.
it is fully on our Ventures feed now.
Either or why not both? Anyway, but yeah, no, the rules section though, I think it is really tight, and I think it actually there's very little difference between the monsters that I made using those guidelines and the ones presented in the bestiary. And so far as that, an appropriate creature level ends up working just fine compared to the same ones in the bestiary. So I mean, it really does give you everything you need right here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I also, just on the subject of kind of what Ross was talking about, even though actually I think, Ross, you were converting from 3.0 or 3.5.
3.5.
Yeah.
3.5, yes.
Yeah. But they do have a sidebar talking about converting first edition creatures to second edition. So I appreciate that they mentioned that in there too.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and then they go on to talk a little bit about building hazards, things like traps, natural hazards, haunts. There's a building item section, which has guidelines for how to make magic items. Also mundane items.
Yep.
So quick shout out, I think, to the items quirk section.
Yes, because
Yeah.
I would not say there is much in this book that necessarily is delightful in, you know, the sense of like I kind of giggled a little bit when I was reading it, but this item quirk section 100% laughed my butt off. So item quirks are weird magical effects that do not have a mechanical benefit that you can add to items to just make them more interesting.
Yeah.
And there is a massive table if you want to roll a percentile dice to get all kinds of crazy things. Like there's like one of them is like it gives the ability, it just comments on what's around it. Like it just occasionally is just like, oh, that's a really nice tree over there. Oh, there's blood, a lot of it. You know, like just like it doesn't mechanically benefit you. It's just kind of cool, like just weird, like quirky magical items.
Or sometimes just weird, like furry. You have a suit of armor that's coated in fur.
Or you have a sword that you pick up and it gets bigger and or smaller. You know, like that. There's that kind of like weird stuff that again it won't matter. Like one of them is really funny. It was you're just wet when you wield this weapon. You know, like you wield the weapon, and you're just damp. Like just weird stuff.
I think one of my favorite is the time telling. It just announces the current time.
Yeah,
I love it.
Or it's just like, and I'd like to think that it does it at random, like you have a ring of you know, fire resistance or something, and every once in a while, like 3 a.m, it's like it's 3:15 at the top of its lungs.
I mean,
non-existent magical lungs.
The carrying one also seems like fun. Just it's like, hey, did you take your potion this morning? hey, you haven't eaten in 12 hours. You should eat something.
You haven't eaten anything but hardtack and trail rations in 5 days.
Yeah.
I wish
maybe
I had
have a piece of fruit.
Yeah,
I want something else, Axe. Please, just stop telling me.
Yeah, and these are both good and bad.
Have you tried drinking the blood of your enemies? Anyway,
No.
Yeah, they're both good and bad. Like there's ones that are we're liking the ones where they talk, but there's a lot of ones where it's just like, you know, harmless insects swarm around it. I'd probably say that's a bad thing because personally I don't like insects like that, but you know, there's just it's not big. It's just your magic item. It's one of those things like I remember we had like with magic items you were supposed to roll on a chart to see things like does it glow?
Sometimes if it glows.
And things like that. Like this kind of expands that out into a lot more weird stuff, which is again delightful.
Yeah. I'd love the idea of a helmet that does the color washing, where it's like anytime you put on the helmet, everything goes in like black and white,
Or
but with like
sepia.
maybe one color, where it's like black and white, but with just red. So you get a whole Sin City vibe going on every time that you're fighting people.
Nice.
Okay, that would be awesome.
That'd be pretty great. Or everything
I need
just
an
looks
investigator.
or everything just looks like a Kurosawa film.
Ooh,
but
fancy.
Yep. So after that, it goes into intelligent items, which are always fun.
That's my favorite section. I love intelligent items.
Staple of classic fantasy literature.
Yep.
Oftentimes not known as fanature. The following section after that is cursed items, which is it's something that has always been in the core rulebooks, but I think cursed items are used so rarely that I think it's fine that it's relegated to a separate book.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that they show in this is they give you a lot of specific examples to kind of gauge your stuff off of.
Real quick,
so like,
does everyone have a favorite example?
Favorite example of cursed items?
Yeah.
Oh, I love the bag of devouring. That's my favorite. It makes me just like, it's funny because they have the picture of it and it's just like it literally has the teeth on it, so it looks like it doesn't look like malicious, but like you could tell like after you identify it, you're gonna be like, oh, I know what that is.
I've just always liked the Ring of Truth. I think it existed in first edition as well, but just the idea like you put on a ring.
Would like the Ring of Truth. You just can't tell a lie. That's your curse. You can't lie.
Yeah, it basically just makes you Jim Carrey from Liar Liar. I mean,
yeah.
So that was fun for him, right?
Yeah. The other kind of interesting part about the cursed items is that they don't feel as deadly per se. At least the examples that they gave, they are usually much more inconvenient.
I mean, my favorite one might be, which is of course the monkey paw.
Of course,
monkey's paws. Yes.
Although I think someone in the chat mentioned this also, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the bag of weasels. It's a bag that sometimes turns your items into weasels, which then when you try to pull them out of the bag will run away as a weasel.
I mean, now we're just talking about all the items, but I also actually really like the Medusa armor.
Oh
Just because it's just more annoying. It's like, ah, man, I turned to stone again, and I gotta wait around.
Well, and it's only when you're critted too, so it's not all the
Yeah.
time. Again, like I said, it's
Yeah.
not like you put it on and you turn to stone like permanently. It's you are turned to stone for one round when you're criticaled. So it's not the worst, you know.
It's annoying, but it's not like, okay, this is game ending. Like,
yeah, so
my
I feel like
character's
it's
done.
I feel like cursed items could be making a bigger appearance just because of that kind of more flexible viewpoint that cursed just can mean inconvenient, not deadly.
Yeah, I will say that there's one of these the cursed like runes and cursed items, and one of them is the grandstanding, which states that whenever you you demand style over pragmatism whenever you reduce a foe to 0 hit points, you lose all remaining actions on your turn as you're compelled to flourish, gloat, pose, or otherwise waste your time in response. And I remember reading that, and I actually read it incorrectly the first time that I saw it, because I thought it read whenever you are reduced to 0. But so at the first time I read it, I thought it was like the William Shatner possum from Over the Head, where you have to do a very dramatic over dramatic death scene whenever you hit 0 hit points.
I mean,
man.
For me, I'm all about that dreary armor, though. You put it on and you're just covered in rain all the time.
It literally
creates a little rain cloud
you.
that follows you.
Yep.
It's pretty great.
But I think we could talk about the cursed items forever, but I think we should probably move on.
We should definitely.
Probably.
Again, it's just fun. It's fun stuff.
Yeah.
That's followed by the relics, which are something that was introduced very late in first edition.
Yeah,
I don't think they're
I
actually.
don't know if we ever even encountered a relic.
No, they were introduced in War for the Crown.
Oh, that's why we've never seen it. Okay.
And I found them, they were very interesting. They kind of reminded me, and Ross might know a bit about this, of the old 3.5 Weapons of Legacy, except for much more eloquently done.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting. You know, it's a magic item that grows with you.
Yeah.
So it's a fun mechanic adding that in, and it makes for some interesting, you know, they give a whole bunch of fun, interesting options for it.
Sorry about that, everyone.
Yep. Then we have artifacts, which are something again that's usually in the core rulebook, but I kind of agree that they don't need to be.
Yeah.
There are already things in the core rulebook that I don't felt like needed to be in there, such as the giant section covering basically the world, of which they then subsequently put out a book that kind of invalidates really the need to have all the rest of that. That's neither here nor there, but the artifact section is kind of fun. It hits on a couple of the big ones. The Elder Sign, for you Lovecraftian fans. The horns of Naraga.
The good old deck of many things.
Yeah, the good old deck of many things. And one of my personal favorites, I think Ross's as well. Sarathiel, the Fate of Still.
Yeah,
boy.
Yeah, I love that sword.
I do like that it has Iomade lore of plus 29. And Zon-Kuthon lore of plus 29.
Yeah, I like that they do establish that the artifacts are basically, they get their own actions, so they're fully intelligent sentient, you know, in terms of, you know, having their own abilities and getting to choose to use them or not use them.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. The, you know, it gives you, I think, it just feels, I think, different than like the usual, like you have to give up one of your actions to give somebody else an action. They do the same thing with intelligent items also, where you know, it's interesting because they do kind of, I think, not game breaking stuff necessarily, but like sufficiently epic kind of actions that you can do with them.
Oh yeah. Speaking of epic actions, I have to mention Kicks the Table mentions I think in connection to that rune we were talking about earlier that makes you gloat over people. It says kills goblin, touchdown, does backflips. So I think we're expanding on Sir George the Kick Flipper.
Man.
It is goblin murdering escapades and
Oh
backflips.
no,
Goodness.
Sir George, why?
Why is Sir George?
I was compelled, sir.
That's unknightly, Sir George.
'Tis a curse.
So, yeah,
I'm no
following-
knight. I
Yeah.
don't know why you call me Sir George.
I don't know. Sir is actually my first name.
Oh no.
Like Mr. T.
Precisely, exactly like Mr. T, as played by Mr. T. So, if the two of you will permit me,
No.
I think I'm going to go on a small diatribe real quick
Okay.
and just say that
Okay.
the following section, which is the gem and art objects, I love to death. And in large part, it's because one of my favorite sections in the 3.5 Dungeon Master Guide was the gem and art section. That was just like, here's a table that I can roll random values for treasure and all of that, because I did a lot of homebrew stuff when I first started, and I referred back to, I still have it up on my shelf back behind me. I think it's down there, somewhere down there in the bottom. And I think it still has my sticky notes from high school stuck in it, marking the page for the gems and all the rest of that, because that was, you kill a monster and you get 1d4 gemstones and there's an art piece. And I just always had people randomly roll it because I found it way more fun.
Yeah.
Disproportionate number of black pearls. I don't know why. And so I loved the inclusion in here, and I love how much attention they spent on the art objects.
Mhm.
Going into things like gilded scepters with sapphires, jeweled mithril crowns, divine art piece created by Shalin for the super expensive ones.
Platinum framed monocle. Anybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you want to be classy. But anyway, it doesn't really
And I
add.
do.
Yeah. It doesn't really add anything, I think, major mechanically as far as a game mastery guide thing is concerned. But I love the homage that oftentimes those give back to, the Gygaxian age of D&D.
You should be able to do
everything.
everything off of a
Yeah.
D100.
Yeah, it's like everything should be just rolling to see what happens.
Yes. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure to meet you. Ross and me we're on the same page.
Woo.
The after that's the afflictions,
Yes.
which
Far
I think
less.
Jordan mentioned in passing earlier, but Technus is in here.
Yep.
That always makes me happy.
Does it?
I was gonna say, I mean, you get curses, diseases, drugs are in
Brokert
here.
is also cursed. Yes. Rick, you had
A
a character
great
who had
piece of a-
tetanus once, right?
I did, and I've inflicted tetanus on more than one player, but
Yay.
it's always that fun level of verisimilitude when I mention, I'm like, just like, yeah, then you cut yourself on like the rusty edge of this this gate as you're trying to push your way into the graveyard, and they're like, oh god, am I gonna get tetanus? I'm like, go ahead and make me a fortitude save.
But I
Now that you
didn't think-
Why not?
mention it, sure.
Now
Oh,
that you
no.
mention it, you probably should.
The consequences of my actions.
Yeah, I will say that the affliction section also includes a phenomenal piece of Plague Doctor art.
Oh
Hmm.
yeah, it's very nice.
Do you guys have a favorite affliction? Mine's tetanus.
Of course it is. I mean, let's see here. I think the Sellsword's Folly is fun just because it's like basically you get confused at the start of combat. It's exactly the sort of thing like maybe an upset witch or something like that would give to some warrior that pissed them off.
Yep.
And,
Also language.
Sorry, you're right.
Ross is the first.
Aha! It wasn't me.
Wow.
For once.
Congratulations, Jordan.
That was you know what? Honestly, I should have bet against myself on that one. No, but at any rate, though, it's just like, it confuses you at the beginning of combat, like you're some sort of scrub. So I just think that's like a funny, like, haha, now you suck at combat.
Yeah.
Have fun with that, warrior.
I think I know what Jordan's will be, but I'm curious if it is.
Oh, it's probably not what you think it is. I picked brainworms.
That's exactly what I
Did
thought
it?
it
Oh
was.
man, you're like totally in sync with me. I
Brainworms
love.
from space, Jordan. Come
I
on.
was gonna say they're extraplanar like brainworms that infest your brain, and it's a fortitude save and goes through its stages, but you are stupefied. And on stage 2, when you take damage, you must succeed at a will save against the disease's DC or become confused for a round. And confusion is just fun. Like, I know it's bad, and it feel like when it's done on you, it's just not fun. But like confusion is just chaos, and it's just a little fun.
Yeah.
Yep. Brain
Also,
worms.
it's all Wrath of Khan, so that's pretty great.
Oh yeah.
Old school Wrath of Khan. But yeah, one thing that after getting that humor out of the way, one thing that I do want to mention here, and I think it does a good job of kind of showing how the Paizo itself has grown, but I think the industry itself has grown over the past 10 years since Pathfinder originally launched. The section on drugs here, I feel, is handled very well.
Mm-hmm.
I also appreciate the fact that they do take the time to talk about how drugs and drug use is a sensitive subject, and about how it's something that many people struggle with. And so it's handled in a way that's serious. It's not something like, okay, well, you have a drug problem and then you can just wipe away that problem with a quick, trip over to a low level cleric.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it also reaffirms the idea of having those X cards. It's for some people, particularly those of us unfortunate enough to have lost someone that we know to drug use,
or if you've struggled with it yourself in the past,
or if you struggle with yourself, that it's something that you should consider before including in your game.
Yeah.
And it's tied inexorably to the setting of Golarion. Katapesh is literally named after a drug. But at the same time, I feel like they did a good job in here of making it something that you can include. It can maybe add an extra level of not only verisimilitude, but also an extra level of role play to a game, as long as it's not doing so at the expense of someone else's enjoyment.
Yeah,
so
and I appreciate that they do include alcohol as a drug.
Yes.
And so the addiction rules and everything that apply to drugs apply to alcohol as well. If you want to add that to your game, you can, if that is a sensitive subject, as it is for a lot of people. I would take that whole section and just get rid of it,
Yeah. But I am glad that it shows how, Paizo is handling it with the sensitivity that it deserves. So I guess serious part of that over, it then moves on to talk about building worlds, kind of breezing through this next section because it's pretty extensive. It talks about like creating worlds, nations, settlements, the planes. It gives stat blocks for all of those, which is a good place that they kind of first start diving into the stat blocks. And they've simplified the stat blocks from first edition because
very much so.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that would come with the stat block for a city that I just didn't use. And so I'm glad that they simplified it down to this is the stuff you need to know. The rest of this can just
Yeah, and if nothing else, it really does give you that kind of hit list of different things, like what kind of government does it have, what's its primary economy driven off of, are they religious, if so, is it pantheistic or not, there's a lot of those kind of issues that you may not just think of if you're just going to world building for the first time. So it definitely gives you a really good basically set of things to consider as you're really fleshing out a location. I appreciate also that they did top down and bottom up world building. So top down is I have the huge nation map of everywhere, and then I flesh it out as I go. Bottom up is I start with the kind of like Paizo did, where it starts with like just kind of not even the inner sea. They started with Varisha and just kind of slowly expanded bits and pieces until it was the entire world.
Yeah. I can't remember who I was listening to that was talking about world building. And I'm sorry if I cut you off there, Ross.
No, you're good.
But they were talking about how when they first started gaming, that they created a small town. I think they said it was like a town of 500 people. And they're like, the party starts there, and they started in a tavern because everyone did back in the beginning of D&D. And it's like, there's a mine over here, and there's kobolds. And then they went into the mine, and he was like, and I didn't ever think about anything else until someone's just like, okay, well, there's that forest nearby. What's that forest called? And he was like, okay. And he's like, I came up with the name of the forest on the spot and wrote it down. And then it's like, okay, well, and then I needed a mysterious stranger to come into town. And then it's like, okay, he came into town. I was like, where did you come from, stranger? It's like, oh, this town, it's on the other side of the forest. And then it was basically, it's like he was putting the tracks down in front of the train. That it's like, I didn't worry about what was on the other side of that mountain until the players wanted to go to the other side of that mountain. It's like, I didn't introduce that there was another country until I wanted to introduce that there was a secret cabal attempting to start a war between the two countries. And I've always found that interesting, and I've never had the time and considering the podcast, I will probably never have the time to do something like that myself. But I find that very intriguing.
It's a difficult
for
endeavor,
those of you who've been able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of goes into that shared storytelling kind of approach too, where it does give you that flexibility to not have put a lot of work into something that the players are not interested in when they want to go off in a different path. So it's an interesting. I mean, there's 100 different ways to do this stuff, and I think that there's a lot of, if you're good at improv, that's the way to go. I'm terrible at improv, so like that's not probably the best way for me to do it. Just because when people are like, come up with a name for this person, I'm like, Bob.
I mean, some people are named Bob.
I mean, yeah, but true. Like, I'm not good with names. I'm not good with locations, and I'm even worse at writing it down after the fact. So it's a whole thing.
Bonus find the path GM advice for this this stream here. I always like to create at least 12 male and female names that sound like they would come from the region they were in, and then just have that on a document or on a piece of paper nearby, so that when someone's just like, what's this NPC's name, I'm just like, okay, I've got it here. And usually with a couple like bullet points of like, here's some interesting things about this person, just so that you have like instant NPCs, because that's the one thing that trips up everybody, where it's just like, oh, I'm going to stop and I'm going to make a diplomacy check to find out what's been going on in this building. You random beggar, it's like, okay, he tells you this thing while petting his dog, and it's like, suddenly I need to know the name of this guy and his dog.
Oh, it's definitely the dog first, though. We want to know the dog's name, then this.
What's the dog's name? Scruffy. They're all named Scruffy.
Yeah. What kind of dog is it? Does it like treats? Can I be its friend?
Do you have more dogs?
Yep. Scruffy will die the way he lived.
Scruffy.
Yep. Yeah, but honestly, that kind of, the world building is the end of this, and it is extensive, but in a very good kind of way.
Yeah, if you're into home brewing, very good stuff.
Yeah. You want to jump us into chapter 3 here, Ross?
Yeah, sure. Chapter 3
That's why we're getting through this book.
Yeah. Chapter 3 is subsystems. Yep. So basically, these are a lot of rules within the rules. Essentially, these are ways to handle specific plot points or ideas that codifies how to do some of it.
And it's the uncommon stuff that doesn't come up all the time.
Yeah, but they could still be very important parts of whatever adventure it is. These include things like influence, chases, infiltration. Hexploration is in here.
I like that they use the term exploration.
Yeah, that they actually use the term hexploration, because I think it was just originally called exploration.
Yeah, but although I think it's common now, like that's what everybody I think calls it now, is exploration.
Well, that's true, and also exploration mode is one of the modes of play.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't think
can
about
see
that.
them
That's
not
a good point.
reusing it.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that they used reputation in here, because it doesn't correspond to reputation of the Pathfinder Society.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they mentioned that it's separate in a sidebar.
Yeah. Yeah, they mentioned that there is reputation in the Pathfinder Society, but I'm surprised they reused the term.
But if you have played Adventure Pass before, some of these systems might very well be familiar. Like victory points, there are multiple Adventure Pass that have something like a victory point thing.
Some of our listeners may be familiar with the research mechanics too.
Perhaps. I mean, I am, because librarian. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Go for
No,
it. I
after
was
you.
just going to say, I mean, yeah, there are all sorts of different ways to add a bit of like spice or flair to your games, which you may not have considered. But these are all fun systems, I think.
And they're not like rules heavy systems either. Like I appreciated that there are some guidelines as far as like if you're doing a chase and you want to put obstacles, this is what that is, and here's different types of chases, but it's not. And then this is the way that you do the initiative for a chase. Blah 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 blah. Like it's much more in line with kind of they're trying to simplify the system in terms of you can still do something unique like a chase and treat it like it's a combat. You can do a research and treat it like it's an exploration.
Yeah. And I feel like almost more than any other chapter, almost more than anything else that they put out for second edition, I feel like this chapter sort of shows the legacy of first edition
Mm-hmm.
because all of these are mechanics that they developed over time. The Hexploration for Kingmaker, the victory points, which I think originally came out in
It's not Curse of the Crimson
Council
Throne.
Thieves.
Oh, Council Thieves.
Yeah.
You know, the influence mechanics, the research mechanics. I think the research mechanics were introduced in Mummy's Mask. Heck, the chase mechanics came back out all the way back in Curse of the Crimson Throne.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
Yep.
And so I feel like this chapter kind of is quintessential them showing everything that they've learned from everything leading up to second edition and then bringing it all into second edition with a whole bunch of rule systems that help people with, you know, the mechanics don't necessarily work for this one specific instance, but sometimes you do just need to show I can build up reputation with a group and have a mechanic that you can turn to it with.
Or like
I also appreciate
leadership is in here. So if you wanted to, raise an army or I don't know, a revolutionary group or something like that, like it has the system for how you can do that.
Yeah. And I also appreciate that Jason was it Jason Bullman? I think it was. Might have been Stephen Randy McFarlane. I can't remember which one. Didn't lie to me at PaizoCon 2019 when I asked if they were working on vehicle mechanics.
Because it's in here.
Because it's in here, and I think they're pretty decent.
It's pretty good. It feels a little Starfinder with like Starship Combat, kind of like they took some of that into the vehicle combat for second edition.
Yeah. Also, it has a great piece of art in here. I think it's page 158, which is I'm gonna guess that's some sort of giant. Looks kind of like an orc, but maybe it's an ogre just judged on size, riding a triceratops, running away from the bard and the sorceress on a flying carpet.
I assumed that was an ogre, but I like that they're on a flying carpet after it, so it's like
Yep. It's like there's a lot of things going on in this encounter.
I just like it when somebody actually uses a flying carpet. I think that's
I love flying carpets. I think they're just super
underutilized
nifty.
item.
It's true. Yeah. Also, triceratops, highly underused
mount. Yes.
I was gonna say if Jess were here, she would be mentioning how awesome it is.
So yeah, I don't figure we'll get much into chapter 3 because it really just covers a whole bunch of subsystems, but the subsystems in there are very interesting.
Yeah,
it's interesting because it's a lot. It feels kind of like Pathfinder Unchained, where you put in like the alternate rule systems, and they've kind of just front loaded that and said, "Here, we can go ahead and try some of this stuff," which is really interesting.
So it's interesting that you say that because chapter 3 I felt like was them taking everything from the various different ultimates, the ultimate combat, the ultimate magic, and then rolling them all into one place, the ultimate campaign. The following chapter, which is chapter 4, which is the variant rules, feels like Pathfinder Unchained.
Yeah.
It feels like they just went, you know what? Here's the Unchained rules if you want to really go for it. So this section contains a variety of different rules and ways to change your game, including things like the ability score variance, which is basically 2E.5. Alignment variants, the deep background, which I love.
I was gonna say that is going back to Ultimate Campaign and like how you built your character in Ultimate Campaign. Yeah. Very, very interesting for people who want something a little off the books in terms of what's available.
And much deeper. Like even if you're not using the mechanic side of that, I feel like that is a great way to really develop a character.
And that's what I liked about Ultimate Campaign was like if I got really stuck on a character, I could always go to Ultimate Campaign, roll a couple of dice, and get some inspiration on how I wanted to stitch a couple pieces together to make it make sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They have a section on feats and features, which covers dual class characters, the free archetype rule, ancestry paragon, the simplified ancestry, and the simplified skill feats. There's the 0 level characters.
It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I feel like it would make the moment I read this, my first thought was if I was running a game that started with something having like tragic happen somewhere where it's the party shows up to deal with it,
cough, like Tyrant's Grasp,
almost more along the lines of if the entirety of the story is about a group of players showing up and this entire place has been devastated and they're going to be the heroes of it. It would be great for a one-off of portraying the average people and then what happened to the town, where it's just like these are the 0 level town guardsmen that tried to stop this hobgoblin invasion. And actually portraying it kind of in a cinematic first person view. I will point out that it does include a neat picture of Kid Velros. He's got like the scar on his nose and the same like expression to him. So there's the magic item variant rules, which I think would be great for doing something if you want to do a low magic campaign. So it's just kind of here's rules for if the party just doesn't have magic items. Proficiency without level. I will admit that like that is a staggering amount of reworking of the very core mechanics of this game. I think they even warn you in there that this requires that you reinvent the wheel that is Pathfinder Second Edition.
In terms of its overall description, just at the chapter, first chapter page, it says changes the fundamental math of the proficiency system to tell stories where being outnumbered by weaker foes remains a challenge and high level characters are less superhuman. So it's fundamentally changing the math of the game, and if you're bad at math, probably not great.
Yeah, it's basically here's the rules if you like Dark Souls and want to play a Dark Souls game, why not start at 0 level too?
Just stack on the difficulty.
Hooray!
You start off with a loincloth and nothing.
Oh goodness, I think we just found another Patreon goal. We'll do a Dark Souls game.
All right, that's 3.
Goodness.
Yep. We're doing good here. And there's the skill point system, which basically gives you something akin to Pathfinder 1E skill points instead of using the proficiency.
Similar-ish.
Similar-ish, adjacent. And then there's a stamina system for those of you who played Starfinder and want more of that.
It is basically the Starfinder health system to give you stamina that you hit before health, and you can take a short rest with your resolve points to get the stamina back. So it's that health system basically just brought over to 2E.
Yeah. Are there any of these variant rules that you guys were really intrigued by?
So I mean, deep background, I think we're all big fans of here. So I'm going to go with besides that because
low hanging fruit.
For me, I'm interested in seeing what the free archetype does. Like in practice, I think in theory it's fine, but it does add a lot of extra feats to a character. So it's like, I don't know. I would definitely have to see it work before I would give it a pure, up or down vote. But I'm very interested in the idea behind it.
Yeah, I'm interested in the stamina system. I play a lot of Starfinder now, and I'm curious to see if it would, with the new action economy, how that would work out well. Because it is one of those things where you're basically giving all of your characters a boost. And, a couple times a day, they basically get free healing. So, how does that work with like a cleric that's able to do quite a lot of healing, or somebody with a medicine skill? Because those are not as prominently put into the Starfinder system. So I'd be kind of curious just to see if it's how balanced it is at the very end.
Yeah. No, it'd be interesting. I find myself actually kind of intrigued by the ancestry paragon. For really delving into a character's ancestry and such. It strikes me a lot like the free archetype, except for ancestry feats tend to be weaker.
It's
and
true.
so
Yeah.
it's like maybe it wouldn't be as unbalanced.
And I mean, there is one point in its favor as well, is that oftentimes for ancestry feats, there are multiples that you can only get at first level that you cannot train into or out of.
Yeah.
Like for if you're playing a half orc, you can choose, like tusks, or you can choose dark vision, but you can't have both.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, but I want both.
Yes,
So,
your 20-year-old half orc's baby teeth don't fall out and suddenly tusks grow in. Orcs are weird. That's all I've got to say.
Somebody just walks up to us and is like, how did that happen? Orcs are weird.
Orcs are weird.
Yeah.
If it was a goblin, it would make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, they probably lose teeth all the time.
Yeah. Sometimes you hit them and they bounce around like a croquet ball. It's weird.
Bouncy.
So, yeah. And then after that is chapter 5, which is the NPC gallery, and it's full of NPCs.
Of note on this that's interesting is they give you a list of NPCs with some stats and things, and a guide on how, if you want to convert them from human to something else, because they're all human throughout this, is basically do this, add dark vision, remove something here. Like, I think it's really kind of quick and easy if you're just wanting to kind of off the cuff put an NPC in play. So it's also got a lot of cool art in it. If you're just looking for the inspiration of the description of the person, because obviously a stat block doesn't describe what they look like. There's a lot of interesting art in here to kind of inspire you on how you want to describe them.
Also, there's a librarian now, so if you need Ross to show up in one of your games,
we've statted out Ross for you.
Yeah.
Paizo didn't even
Pull
know they
out
were
the
doing that for
research
us.
mechanics.
Mhm.
Yeah, and honestly, it includes a whole bunch of interesting character. Again, the artwork in this section is phenomenal. The sidebars are all really good, providing some interesting information. It's interesting because in first edition, that's kind of what the Game Mastery Guide became known for, was the place that had all the stat blocks for all the NPCs.
Yeah.
And then eventually they put out the NPC Codex, and we may eventually get a 2e NPC Codex sometime in the distant future. But in the meantime, I figured this is probably going to get a lot of use, especially in society play.
Yeah.
So, but and also if you just find yourself saying, the party got drunk and I need them to fight some town guardsmen now because apparently they're resisting arrest, and then it turns into a giant free-for-all. You've got like barmaids in here and bartenders and the town guard, and I'm sure some bards in there somewhere. So
yeah,
you can
I
get a
mean,
whole
pretty
thing
much
going on.
any common profession, is gonna be in there. Yeah.
So and that
Don't
takes
start
up
a
the
fight in
majority.
the smithy. That's for sure.
Hit the head with the hammer.
Nah.
Yep, and following that is the Glossarian Index, which is exactly what you would expect from a Glossarian Index. But
No
We'll say no
surprises
more
there.
about that.
So I guess before we get to the question, closing thoughts. Mine tend to just be that I feel like this book is a lot more useful than the 1e version of it was.
I agree with that.
Which I found very rarely using. All the optional rules, again, make it feel kind of like a cross between the Game Master Guide and Pathfinder Unchained. And I feel like this book does a great job of illustrating Paizo taking all the lessons that they learned since they launched Pathfinder in 2007. And well, I think Pathfinder itself came out in 2009, but the Adventure Path started then. But taking everything that they learned and all of the optional rules that they conglomerated together and then distilling it down into something that goes, not only is this great guide for learning to play Pathfinder, but honestly, it's a great guide for learning to run tabletop games.
Yeah, regardless of even if you play other game systems, there are tips and tricks in here that apply to any tabletop game.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a brilliant summation. That's pretty much my thoughts exactly. So,
yeah, I mean,
Awesome.
especially if you homebrew in second edition, this is a must buy, like hands down.
Yeah, especially homebrew.
Yeah.
It's, although again, there's a lot that you can take of interest from this for anyone just looking to perfect your craft. There are things that I read in here that I felt like I learned something, and I've been running games for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Same.
Well, do we have some you want to get some questions from the chat? We've got some questions from the Discord. What do we want to start with?
Let me start with the Discord ones, I think, because there's some overlap with the chat where they've asked the same question. So
Okay.
Cool.
We'll figure it out.
So should I go ahead and tell us our first question?
Sure.
All right. So our first question comes from Mirror, Nocticulin Herald from our Discord channel. So
Hello, Mirror.
always glad to have a Herald of Nocticula here. She's very interesting.
Always a pleasure.
Yes. Which of the alternate rule systems in the book do you like the most? And which do you think would have made the best addition to the core rules? So, I mean, again, I think we're all big fans of the deep background system.
Yeah.
I also, however, think that if I were going to add something to the core rules, the incremental alignment system, I think, would be very helpful, especially for newer players, just because of how alignment can trip up a lot of folks. Like, I'm chaotic good. Well, what does that mean? I mean, I'm chaotic first, or I'm good first, or like, am I just sort of weird? I don't know what I'm doing. So, yeah. I think that would be a very handy one to have.
Yeah, I mean, I think the gradual ability increases, I think, would have been an interesting system to add in, because it is always that kind of verisimilitude that's weird, where I hit a level and suddenly I have more stat points, and it's just like one day I'm just a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, and doing it at a more gradual pace can kind of ameliorate that for verisimilitude's sake. The stamina system I think is interesting. I don't know how balanced it would be. I don't really think it needs to be in the core game, just because that is kind of a uniquely Starfinder-y system, and I think differentiating the systems is kind of important. So if nothing else, like it's an option if you play a lot of Starfinder and want to try 2E. It kind of makes it easier for you to jump over and be like, oh yeah, because the thing with the stamina system that I find is I don't freak out until I get to the hit points. And then it's like, oh no, what is happening?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would work really well with the action economy of 3 actions where you can get dropped in, who knows how many actions.
It's serious business all of a sudden.
I know.
I've lost
my stamina's empty.
Actual hit points.
I'm taking real hits.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement that the deep background is probably the system that I liked the most. The one that I think would have probably made the best addition to the core rules might have just been the point buy. I always like having a number of different ways to
make stats.
Yeah. Well,
we
we
did point buy in first edition, and that was a changeover from rolling dice for your stats from, was it D&D that does that?
Well, yeah, and Pathfinder does it too. There's it's always an option in Pathfinder, and there's a certain subsect of tabletop gamers who are firmly under the impression that if you're not rolling your ability scores, you're not doing it right.
As somebody with bad luck, I
which is
disagree
fair.
vehemently. I get nothing but trash stats.
Yeah, the only time that I've ever I've done just rolled ability scores and everything before. The only time I've ever found a way to really balance it is I was playing in a game that I had 6 players, and I just had everyone roll 1 ability score and then write down all 6 numbers that everyone rolled, and that was everyone's, and they could just arrange them however they wanted. But of course, then you always have that one person that rolled like a 7. And everyone's like,
this guy.
Why?
We're the most unlikable party ever. We've got 5 charismas of 7. And 1 charisma of 5. It's the dwarf.
Nice.
So yeah, that's what I would say.
For question number 2. So for home games, let's see here. Are you using any of the alternate systems?
What home games
for that first part,
produce this content?
For the first part, I don't think I have much in the way of home games at this point, but Let's see here. In addition, though, sorry, these are all from Rose from our Discord channel, by the way. I should have mentioned
Rose.
that first. Hello, hello.
I guess sort of home game we have is Tales of Darkmoon Vel, and we are not using any of those rules for Tales of Darkmoon Vel.
Yeah,
true. It's the closest thing we have. I mean, we had a Plaguestone game.
Yeah, we did a fall Plaguestone when the game
other...
first came out. I think it was even before the Gamemastery guide came out. So
yeah, but it's been a while. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff going on. But she did have questions for thoughts on gradual ability boost, which I think we did cover, and free archetypes, which we did cover. What do you think of the new research rules? Which I think Rick is probably going to have the most familiarity with that. And also,
I like them. I was just going to say, I like the new research rules. I feel that they are less cumbersome than they were in first edition. And I also like how I think one of the excuse me, I think one of the examples that they gave, or I think it was the example they gave for a library, was something like a druid's glade that had like the information stored there. And I like how they make a point to show that you could research through a variety of different sources. So all in all, I think it's interesting. I love to see it in play, and especially with second edition, I've always liked the way that they have the critical failure rules, and how that can kind of make some interesting stuff for research.
Yeah, I like that you find. It's not that you don't find anything; it's that you find the wrong thing. So it's that thing of like actually taking a step back instead of you just don't make any forward progress. That I think is kind of interesting. And in a lot of these subsystems, it has that same kind of a vibe to it.
Yeah. Let's see here. She continues by asking, so do you like the deep backgrounds or the incremental alignment system, which I believe we did also cover both of those.
Yes.
We're big fans of the deep background.
Yes. Oh my, it's so good, y'all. So good. And then finally she asks, stamina points, should they have been standard? Which I know Jordan touched on a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think so. It's that thing with second edition when we first started playtesting it, one of the things that everybody was worried about was would it still feel like Pathfinder? And I feel like the stamina system doesn't feel like Pathfinder.
I also I mean I have played I have also played both Starfinder and Pathfinder 2E. Yeah. And I think that my biggest thing for Pathfinder 2E is that non-magical healing is a lot more efficient in Pathfinder 2E. Yeah. In Starfinder, it's a little harder to come by, which makes the stamina system, I think, much more important because you can keep going by just spending your resolve point. But in Pathfinder, I don't think it's absolutely necessary, just because you can just have a doctor who just sits there and heals people outside of combat.
Yeah.
And anybody can train in the medicine skill.
Very true.
Yeah.
This might be considered a little bit of a controversial view, but I kind of feel like let Starfinder have that. It's a fun, interesting thing that Starfinder has, and
I can see that.
I know a lot of people have kind of I've listened to some behind the scenes stuff where they some people say it's like, oh well, they use Starfinder to play test ideas for Pathfinder Second Edition. And some of the behind the scenes stuff was like, well, we were actually working on some stuff for second edition. And then the Starfinder team, overheard, or we talked about it. And then they went, that's a great idea. Let's try implementing that in this new system, because why not? It's a good idea.
Yeah.
I feel like the stamina system feels distinctly Starfinder, and just let Starfinder have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They can share the bulk system.
Yeah, we're already sharing bulk. What more do you want from us? All your fantasy characters looking enviously on at my levitating platform. Fortunately, I have a hover droid to carry my tank.
Anyway, I have a levitating platform too, though. It's just called a floating disc.
I have my floating disc. Screw you, Technomancer. Come back when you can cast higher than 6-level spells. Anyway,
shots fired.
I think that pretty much covers Rose's questions, though. Like I said, we did cover a lot of her questions just in our general discussion, I think.
It turns out Rose has some very astute questions, so
absolutely.
they came up organically during the discussion. So,
Yeah.
but thank you for the questions.
Good Couch from our Discord has chimed in with hello. Y'all are more into the illustrated covers or the faux leather special edition covers? So I know Rick has his.
As much as I like my faux leather cover here, I do just kind of like the artwork.
Yeah.
Like the artwork is so beautiful, and while the leather covers are very nice, it's almost more of a display piece. You can see right there. I've got a couple others back there propping up with my books there, but I tend to get both. And then I'm not one of those people that never takes the faux leather one out of the plastic wrap. But I don't tend to use them for anything other than like home. You know, I've got one that I keep at home, and then a lot of times when we're actually back in the recording studio, I'll have ones that I leave there where it's like, I'll need the bestiary eventually, so I'll leave this here even though I've got my fancy one back at home.
Yeah, I like the faux leather ones. I just like it when books are fancy, and like you don't see many like leather bound books anymore. So like those are always cool, and I use them even though I know that they're like, you know, collector's edition and stuff. So like, because like I have the special edition core rulebook that's the same kind of leather construction, and I just use it as my regular one. I was gonna say, as Rick just points up at his.
So
actually, and you can barely see it over my shoulder there, but there's the faux leather Curse of the Crimson Throne up there with my first edition stuff. It's nice.
Yep.
So the librarian in me does like, you know, old school book covers. That's always a treat.
Yeah.
But I prefer the regular covers for two reasons. First, I just like the pretty pictures. They're pretty pictures, and I like them. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Second, despite the fact that I'm a librarian, I have a history of my books being very well loved. So, you know, spending extra for like the special edition covers when I'm probably just going to ding it up and it's going to get cat scratches and all that stuff. Like, nah, I'll just stick with the regular one.
Yeah, I see the culprit there behind you.
Yep. She's awakening from her nap, which is probably fine.
Better hurry this up then before she gets angry.
Yes. She'll probably just want to like nuzzle the microphone or something.
Yep.
All right.
What else do we have from Discord?
So our fourth question is coming from our Discord. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. I could be doing that wrong, and I apologize.
I think it's Array.
Array. Yeah.
That's right. You.
Yeah. Asks, what subsystem and alternate rules could you see using in your own games? And are there any you flat out don't like at all?
Ooh.
So for me, I actually really like the dueling rules. And I think that's just because I grew up with a lot of things like, you know, Star Wars and Princess Bride and stuff like that. So I've always just liked the idea of like the one-on-one duel and the back and forth and riposays and all that fun stuff. I'd love to
do the Duel of Fates.
Yeah, exactly.
I like the infiltration rules. I remember going way back here when I did a homebrew for Pathfinder, and I did an infiltration like a bank heist kind of a thing, and didn't really have a lot of good guidance on that, and so I just kind of made it up. And so I think infiltration is just really interesting because it also has that like you're trying, like the system itself has the you're trying not to be noticed, and so like you accumulate points of basically notice that some people are eventually going to notice, the guards are missing, the alarms are disabled, they know that somebody's here, kind of a thing. So I think that that's kind of really interesting, and I'd like to run it just to see how it goes. As far as this something I just flat out don't like, I mean, I'm not really that kind of person that's going to rag on something that's an optional system. Honestly, I like all the subsystems because we've used almost all of them, I think, except maybe vehicular combat, really, at one point or another. And you know, it's just fun. It's some of the more memorable moments in my gaming career have been moments where we're using one of the subsystems because it's like full on stop. Everybody's going to do something different. And it's kind of like a nice change of pace. So, I mean, if you don't like the optional systems, I'm not really going to rag on it.
Well, I'll take up that challenge. And no, I'm not going to rag on any of this because, again, I think that they took a number of systems that I may have been willing to critique rather harshly in first edition and have streamlined them and distilled them down to much better versions. If there's a system that I can see kind of doing without, it's probably the influence system. Just because a lot of that is something that can just be handled organically through roleplay anyway and doesn't necessarily need to be codified into a mechanic system. Now, for some people, it is very useful if it is done that way, where I know exactly what I need to do to get this information out of people, to figure out what their secrets are, to influence them. But it is a system that I think that a lot of times you could just organically role play your way through as opposed to needing
it's good
to
for
include
groups
a
that
mechanic in there.
Yeah, it's good for groups that don't really have strong role players. If you're, the kind of people that say like, man, I don't know what to say to this person, but like roll a dice, I succeed. If you've got that kind of a group where like, they're not so good in the role play, I think it's a valuable system. But I feel like a lot of players are probably not going to use it because of exactly what Rick's saying. It's you can do it more organically.
Yeah. Although to be perfectly honest, again, it's kind of like having a box of cookies and that's the sugar cookie in there, which for me is the one that I'll eat last, but I would still eat it and enjoy it. So I'm just not a sugar cookie kind of guy.
I think for me, the oatmeal raisin, I guess, in this
in this analogy. Okay.
Yes. So they've done skill points very differently from what they did in first edition. So if you're thinking of it like it's first edition, it's really not exactly. And I get the idea behind it. Like ultimately, you just end up with characters that have more varied skills rather than like 2 or 3 legendary skills, basically. But I don't know. It just didn't feel absolutely necessary. I mean, I could see some groups maybe wanting to do it. And, I don't think it would be a bad thing. It just feels like maybe more trouble than, I would want to do for most campaigns.
Yeah.
So,
as far as the system that I like and I could definitely see using in my own games, and this is a little bit of a cheap, considering this one is so versatile, it's almost a little bit cheap of me to say this. It's probably going to be the victory points. I like the simple mechanic of it where a success gives you a victory point, a critical success gives you 2, a failure means you don't gain anything, a critical failure means you lose 1 victory point. And they talk about how the victory points can be anything. So a victory point could be renamed a style point if you're doing a gladiatorial game where the party has to, do some prep like thing beforehand, or if you're doing like luchador or wrestling or something like that, where it's you play to the crowd beforehand, so you're accumulating victory points that are added to a later total. But they could be used for but they could be used for anything. You could do Great British Bake Off, and then your victory points for cooking your stuff,
using rare ingredients and stuff like that.
And so it's the simple mechanic of it. I just really appreciate it as a way to allow players to track their progress. So I could see using it in pretty much anything. And again, it reminds me of they introduced a similar system a couple of times in Adventure Paths previously, where it's something like the city is being attacked and is being destroyed around you, and you need to earn victory points and compare those to the end total to see how well you've done and how much of the city you managed to keep from being actively on fire. So victory points.
Woo.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see all the systems fleshed out. I know that's like a kind of complete non-answer, but I am very interested in. I think research makes one of those things where there's so many interesting ways, because like Rick kind of pointed out, there's a different kind of definition of what a library is for the sake of research tech. I think it'd be really interesting to see how you can tie doing the equivalent of a research check with just a gather information kind of a role play. So like, going down to the tavern and seeing how you get information from the tavern goers versus going down and, I don't know, mingling with a crowd at a sporting event or something like that. I feel like there's some interesting like social constructs that weren't really talked about in this that would be kind of interesting to see fleshed out.
I like that Jordan cheats and gets 2. He didn't think we'd notice that he went back and chose a different one after infiltration, but we noticed.
I thought infiltration was good. Like, I didn't really need to flesh it out.
I thought infiltration was good too, but then Jordan's like, you know what? I'm gonna pull a Rachel and get 2.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that I think brings us to our 5th question, though, which is which subsystems would you like to see fleshed out more? Are there any that you felt were missing? And this question comes from Caps in our Discord. So
Missing? Not immediately. I can't remember. I don't think that the duels cover psychic duels also. Do they?
No, it's spellcasting.
No, but I mean that might. Yeah, I mean that might be partially because I don't think psychic per se is necessarily.
Yeah, the occult
out.
stuff isn't out.
Occult,
so psychic duels. I would like to see psychic duels come back because I thought that was an interesting concept. As far as fleshed. Oh, sorry.
No. Go for it.
I was just going to say, as far as fleshed out more, I would just love to see a lot more attention given to the chase mechanics because I've always felt the chase mechanics are something that is really interesting, but also it puts a lot of onus on the game master to come up with like obstacles and all the rest of that. And so, again, I think they put out a couple of card decks that were things full of obstacles. I think having a larger section dedicated to a giant list of obstacles based on maybe terrain, kind of like they did for the senses thing way earlier, where they're talking about here's the various types of senses. It could just be like here's an athletics, acrobatics thing, so on and so forth, and then it's like jumping over a log versus balancing on a log versus shoving a log out of your way.
Get out of the way, log.
Yep. Rolls downstairs. Anyway, it's log.
Let's see here. As far as fleshed out more, I would like to see more research examples. I think that'd be really neat, like I think Jordan was saying just a little bit ago. Another thing, system, I don't know if this would be a system that they will implement. It might not be, but I think it would be really cool if they did. Would be I'd really like to see potions of actual spells returning. That was one thing that I know that they changed around how a lot of it works. Like potions just have specific effects now, which I think does make them more versatile. But I just liked being able to like go, oh, okay, here I've got a potion of heroism, and chug that down. So I hope something like that comes back, at least as an optional rule system at some point.
Yeah.
One that could be fleshed out more. I did kind of steal a little bit of this on the research thing I was talking about. I can't really think of a lot for infiltration necessarily, other than I didn't see anything about camouflage. So maybe an interesting like addition on that of like what kind of camouflage you can do and like what's the process I guess for doing that, because they have a section on like what happens if you get disguises, so it might be kind of interesting to see what else you could do with that, or additional planning things that you can do like ahead of your infiltration might be interesting. Things that I felt were missing, it's a hard pick. I liked cinematic combat. I know it's not really a popular system that was used a lot, but I always find that the big thing that I feel is missing from Pathfinder is those epic battles where it's like Helm's Deep and like the two armies are crashing into each other, and cinematic combat does a really good job at portraying that without it being too much of a mess. So I would like to see cinematic combat again.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of the mass combat sort of stuff. Yeah.
Mass combat, yeah. Is that what it's called? Mass combat? I totally just said that wrong.
There are two different systems. Mass combat was like you each have an army and you fight. The cinematic combat was again more like what you were talking about, like it's Helm's Deep and you're fighting a lot of really, really weak enemies, but usually you're at a higher level and it's just like, look at how awesome I am, basically. So
yeah,
which is fun.
Yeah, I just like to get those moments where it's like, oh yeah, I'm casting fireballs and I'm actually hitting every single square has a person in it. Like that's just fun. I'm all for death and destruction, man.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're running a little bit over right now, so do we want to rapid fire our way through our questions here in chat? Because I'd like to give an answer to all of these.
Yes, let me do some couple ones here.
We'll have to contain ourselves because we all go a little long.
Yeah, Krakagar says, speaking of Tyrant's Grasp, which part of the guide talks about making your players cry?
Oh.
It's really just kind of an underlying implication through the entirety of the guide.
Every part made me cry.
It's the little side blurb that says, "This is survival horror. Don't expect a happy ending."
Mm-hmm. Oh,
yeah. Let's see. English Bob
You can hope.
asks, "What's the best way to handle PC loot when they die and create a new character? Do you give them the new limit and deal with the party gaining wealth?" I assume that means they stripped all the items off of them.
So I've got two ways that I deal with this. You guys can let me know if you have a different way. The first off is I have a lot of times that my players will do basically Viking burials, where it's you died and you get to take your stuff into the next life. It works well when you're dealing with players that are willing to do that, and it's just kind of sometimes everyone will take like an item, but it's not like, okay, we're going to strip his body of everything that he owns. I also have always liked it when I think I've only ever had this happen in one game before, that a character died and that player's or that character had a child. And so they did like the classic, we've taken all of your father's gear and we put it in this chest and we've returned it back to you. And it's like, look after this and know that your father died a hero. And I always like to think this, like, 10 years down the line, the town gets attacked and he opens up the chest and dons his father's armor.
It's time to suit up.
Yep, time to suit up. And he's suddenly a first level character with like a 10th level character's gear, but sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa,
he was the greatest hero of all.
+2 striking, flaming, great sword. Whoa. Anyway.
Yes, everyone remembers Todd, the non-level compliant gold per character level character. He had a very long title. The second one that I've never really had to do, but can, is if you have access to what all was on that character, and this requires a bit more of bookworking, is figure out exactly what the treasure value for everything that was on that character was. Figure out what the value of that would have been if they'd sold it, and then reduce that amount for the treasure that they'll receive moving forward. It is the best way to keep it balanced. A lot of times you can kind of hand wave it if it's, a 3rd or 4th level character dies and they're taking their their bow and their sword and all the rest of that.
Yeah, in the long run, it's not going to be a huge difference.
Yeah, but if it's the death of like a 12th level character, and then they're suddenly dividing his gear amongst themselves, and then a new character showing up fully decked out, that can be an issue.
Yeah.
A third one actually just occurred to me while I was speaking, so I'll point this one out also. A great thing to do, especially if they're, say, I don't know, they're fighting their way through a serpent folk lair or something like that, is go, oh God, our wizard died and this is horrible and tragic. And then they, travel down the hallway after, taking all the stuff off of them, open up a door, and then it's like chained to the wall is a elven wizard instead. He's like, thank you, I've been trapped here this entire time. You don't happen to have gear appropriate for a character of my level. And then they just hand it over to the new character.
Yeah.
Those are my suggestions.
I think they're good ones, yeah. All right, so moving on. Graph asks, have you ever had to tell a player you weren't allowing them to play anymore, basically kicking them out?
Yes, I have. I've had to do this a couple of times, actually, unfortunately. And usually it's when a friend of mine brings in a friend that's interested in starting to play. And the couple of times I've had to do this have been for various difficult reasons. Sometimes it's, the one player that doesn't understand that his comments are offensive or upsetting other players. And other times it was just occasions where it was someone you just could not adhere to a schedule. That would let him play with everyone else, and so he would only be in 1 out of every 3 sessions. It's difficult to do. The only advice I can really give about it, there's advice in this book also, but is explain why you're doing it. Make sure that they know that it's nothing personal, and just let them understand that be kind but firm. Because a lot of times there'll be I'll get better about getting here on time, or I'll try to change what's the problem. And if you've given them fair warning,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that you should hold your ground.
Yeah.
And especially if it's something like this person is making comments, unfortunately, in the case of the player that I had to ask to leave, it was made some rather insensitive sexist comments. And
Mm.
that is not acceptable, especially that's not acceptable even if you're at an all cis male table or anything like
Mm.
that. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely not acceptable if you have anyone there that those comments felt like they were being directed towards.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that case, I'd suggest just being firm and saying the fact of the matter is this isn't working. Hopefully you can find your own group, and this is where the problem is. Maybe reconsider how your words are affecting others.
Yeah.
It's never easy.
No.
Yeah. And I've actually been blessed in not having to have those conversations with any of my players. I'll chalk that up to having an awesome friend group of people who aren't like that.
Yeah.
But I do remember we have had a time in our history together where we had players come in that were just utterly disruptive, and it was a table decision less so than just the GM being like, I don't want to deal with you anymore. So the only advice that I can really give you is to make sure you check in with your players, especially if you're aware that something is, but also if you're not aware that something's going on, because just because it doesn't bother you doesn't mean it doesn't bother somebody else at the table. And a lot of times they may not feel comfortable actually going out and calling somebody out on the floor. So, catch them after the game and say, hey, is everything okay? I saw you got really quiet there during that. Just try to keep an open mind and try to handle the situation with as much empathy as you can, because it is dealing with people's feelings. And as kind as you can try to be, we all have our own blind spots and biases. And so just be aware of the fact that everybody has different experiences and has a different kind of mindset, especially when it comes to sensitive topics like the things that they discuss in this book, like alcoholism and things like that. So just all in all, try to be a human being. Check in with your players, because the thing about Pathfinder is you can go really deep into it, and it can be nigh real in some cases, and you don't want to re-traumatize anybody or offend anybody or anything like that.
Yeah,
absolutely. One last thing I would maybe offer as a suggestion for this, even before you reach that point. This is why a lot of times it's a good idea to have a trial run with a player before you bring them fully on into what's going to be a long-term game. So if you've met a group and you're starting to put something together, maybe try a couple society games beforehand to make sure that everyone's personality is going to mesh. And sometimes there'll be problems that don't become apparent, sadly, until the person becomes more comfortable. And then once they become more comfortable, they're willing to show a side of them that they usually don't to people that they don't necessarily know. And oftentimes that can be, unfortunately, where the issue stems from.
True.
I'll second that of doing the trial run, especially before like an adventure path or anything that's a long-term commitment.
Absolutely.
For these reasons, as well as like you'll find out if they're always difficult to schedule, and if you're trying to do a weekly game and they'll never show up for a weekly game. It solves a lot of problems that you're going to have down the line, because the last thing you want to do is be a book in and find out that this person can't commit and things like that.
Yeah. So I guess the takeaway there is be firm but fair.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Question from RevCon in the chat. Considering how important AP teams are saving the world, will you ever use the reputation rules? I would never say never. I mean, that's kind of the thing, is like I can't think of us necessarily needing it for like Tyrant's. Well, I guess we're not doing Tyrant's Grasp in Second Edition, but like I would never say never to anything, because you never know where things are going to go.
I think a lot of that depends on. I won't delve into spoilers or anything here, but I think a lot of that depends on the individual adventure path.
Yeah.
Because in some adventure paths, word of your character's actions becomes widely known, And oftentimes, the towns that you save celebrate you, and the people that you save, and maybe you saved a local lord, or a local nobleman or something like that. Sometimes you're saving the world in the background, and no one really knows who you are. And it's just like we show up to a town, and we're really famed in this town of 800 people that we saved from utter destruction. But once we reach the big city, no one really knows us, and they're just like, oh yeah, that you saved that town. Oh, cool. I thought they died a long time ago.
Yeah, there was a town out there since when?
Wow, okay.
I thought I'd right. There are people still living out there. Wow.
Are you sure?
Why? No.
So yeah, I think a lot of that kind of depends on, if you're playing something like, and again, I'm avoiding any spoilers here, but if you're playing something like Skull and Shackle, where the whole idea is to be these pirates and become these pirates of legend, then I could definitely see using that mechanic in there, where you're building up your character's reputation and renown amongst other pirates. But at the same time, if you're doing something along the lines of let's just say Council of Thieves,
Council of Thieves.
But Council of Thieves, where it's you're kind of doing a lot of this on the low key, where it's like, we're opposing the government of Thrune, or we're trying to help the town and do these things, but we're also kind of doing it on the down low. So
like, we don't want people to know who we are everywhere we go.
And contrast that with like Curse of the Crimson Throne, where it's very obvious that you are saving the town, and people know what you are, and you have special cloaks and all this other stuff.
I could also see doing it by region as well.
Yeah.
So it's something like, if you're looking at Mummy's Mask, the doorkeepers, again, no spoilers here, but the doorkeepers start doing some grand things that would be rather well known in the three cities and on Wati and Tefu. But at the same time, in Sothis, more likely than not, no one would recognize their names, even if they're household names in the South.
Yeah.
So, I could see using the mechanic, though. I think it would be kind of a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
Okay, next question from Kick the Table in the chat. Is there any tool, rule, subsystem, etc. that you thought was cool but would probably never use in one of your games?
Well, again, never say never, but
yeah, I was gonna say I can't say that I wouldn't experiment to try it if somebody was keen,
Yeah.
I mean, that being said, most of the games I end up running tend to be localized enough that I don't think I'm going to use vehicles all that often. But they're if they come up, though, then it's handy to have them.
You say that, and then there's a chariot race through the town.
Yeah, I mean, you never know, but
right?
But like, as far as I can tell, I probably won't use those much, if at all.
Yeah. Honestly, I think the only one that really jumps out to me that's come up in a game that I'm doing that I didn't end up using was Hexploration. In large part because, not necessarily because I don't like it from a gameplay standpoint, it's that sometimes subsystems are really good if you're looking at it as a game. If you want to be able to look at it from that that high view and stare down and look into the minutia of the mechanics. But if you're doing something like we usually do, where we're doing a podcast, then I think I
go northwest on the board.
Like, I go northwest 1 hex, and then search this 12-mile hex thing, and I've used it a little bit in the background sometimes in in Mummy's Mask even. And but at the same time, even while using it, I tend to narrate everything as opposed to using the exact mechanics of it, because it just doesn't work as well for audio. So I think I'd avoid using something like Hexploration for a podcast. However, I've used the chase mechanics, I've used vehicle mechanics, I've used the research check stuff and all the rest of that. So I think most of them work really well, but the Hexploration gets a little bit into the minutia. It's kind of like they didn't include the kingdom building mechanics in here, but the kingdom building mechanics get very, here's a board game that we're playing while playing this tabletop.
I was going to say,
game.
that's like a whole separate game.
Yeah. It really is.
So, anyway, just my 2
let's
cents.
see. And that's it. We're out of questions.
Alrighty.
So, huzzah. Thank you so much for everybody who asked a question, by the way.
Yeah.
We always
And
appreciate
thank you
your
for
feedback.
And thank you for attending and watching. Even if you didn't ask any questions, we hope that you had a fun time.
Absolutely.
And if you're listening
we hope
to
that,
it after the fact, thank you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just thank everybody.
We appreciate you you coming here. I hope this provides all of you a little bit of escapism where you can kind of come here and just enjoy listening and talking game stuff and everything else with us. And I hope you've learned something. And if you have not picked up the Game Master Guide, I would recommend it, actually, even from a game master with a great deal of experience. I found that I learned a lot from it, and it sounds like my stalwart co-hosts feel the same.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right. Then I guess if there's nothing else, thank you all for coming here listening. Thank you to everyone on the Discord who provided us with some questions, and we hope that we answered those well enough for you. And until next time, good luck, Pathfinders.
Bye, Pathfolk.
Till next time. Bye.